Okay, today we're speaking with someone that, well, if you look at any list of the most influential or philanthropic Clevelanders in the last 50 years or so, this guy's name comes right up. And of course, we're talking with Alex Machaskee. And Alex, I think if someone was woken up at 3 a.m. and said, okay, who's Alex Machaskee? They'd obviously say, he's the publisher, the plain dealer, Cleveland's, Ohio's largest newspaper, but there's so much more to the story. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, and thank you for the invitation to have a chat with you.
All right. So let's start right at the beginning. Where were you born? Tell us a little about your family, some of that.
Well, I was born in Warren, Ohio. Very poor family. In fact, they couldn't afford to take me to the hospital for my birth, so I was born on a kitchen table in 1014 Roanoke Street in Warren, Ohio.
Wow, you remember the address?
It was south of the tracks, as they say, and it was in the home of my paternal grandparents, who were Mildred and Alex. Actually, their name was Machaskee. In English, it would be Masic, M-A-C-E-S-I-C-H. But although my dad was born in this country, his mother had a boarding house in western Pennsylvania, and he grew up amongst a combination of Serbian and Croatian minors in this boarding house. And so when he started school at the age of 7,
wow,
he really couldn't speak English very well. So the teacher asked him through an interpreter his name, and he says Juro in Serbian, it's George in English, Machaskee, and somehow Machaskee came Machaskee. So I've often wondered if I should change my name back to Machaskee, which in English would be Masic, M-A-C-E-S-I-C-H, but it is what it is.
Yeah, you can't change it now. So Warren, Ohio, you don't think of it as necessarily a hotbed of... Back then it was Yugoslavia, of course. There was a Serbia, but it was part of Yugoslavia.
We're talking about Warren, Ohio.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure.
Was there a Serbian community there?
Not really. The closest church at that time, Serbian church, was in Youngstown. But at any rate, my father, he worked in a steel mill, copper weld steel, and my mother was a waitress and cook at a restaurant called the Erie Restaurant. And like I said, we lived there from the time I was born until I was just about 6 years old. And then my parents bought a home on 4th Street, in the southwest side of Warren, and we moved there, and I started the school and First Street School. And shortly thereafter, my grandfather passed away, and my paternal grandmother came to live with us on 4th Street.
So you're a kid here, and people would think you're so fluent in Serbian, and you know so much about Serbian culture and history and all that. You were either born in Serbia or you went to Serbian schools as a kid or something. But Warren, Ohio probably didn't have Serbian schools. How did you acquire, and when did you acquire your language skills?
First of all, when my grandmother came to live with us, and I was a little over 6 years old, and she was with us for 12 years. So she and I communicated in Serbian, and that's where I learned fundamentally how to speak Serbian, because my mom and dad really didn't speak Serbian at home. They understood it, they could speak it, but they just didn't converse in Serbian. But my grandmother, who lived with us, she and I did. And the other thing that was a big help for me is that at the age of about 11, if you could imagine, I would take a bus on a Saturday morning from my home on 4th Street down to the Erie station, take a train from Warren to Youngstown, a half-hour train ride, and then a bus from the train station in Youngstown to the Serbian church, Holy Trinity Serbian Church. And I would be there all day. Half a day was for Bible studies, and half a day was for Serbian culture. including reading and writing in the Serbian Cyrillic.
Oh, wow.
Which I could do fairly well at that time, but you don't use it over the years, you start to lose some of it. But I did that for 2 years. One time, it was always the reverse coming back home. You take a bus from the Serbian church to the train station in Youngstown, the train ride, half hour from Youngstown to Warren, and then bus from the train station in Warren home. But one time I fell asleep on the train, and I woke up in Ravenna, Ohio. So they got me an ice cream cone and put me on a mail car and sent me back to Warren.
Wow.
But those 2 years of Serbian school on Saturdays in Youngstown gave me a good foundation in my faith, my religion, and also in the Serbian culture. And then, of course, years later, to keep my sanity from running to Plain Dealer, I also had an acoustic Serbian band, and we played everywhere from New York to Las Vegas and Los Angeles. And I never like to sing Serbian songs unless I know what they mean. So that helped me to expand my vocabulary quite a bit.
Well, that's not something a young boy necessarily wants to spend his Saturdays doing, but it was important enough for you to do it for.
Yeah, it was something I wanted to do, and I enjoyed being able to be independent enough. I mean, 11 years old, 12 years old, to go on a bus and go on a train to another city it took a little bit of doing.
And as you say, you were a poor family. Let's just say it was poor. And
poor.
So as a youngster, you took on some odd jobs, selling some things, the baseball games and popcorn and all, and supermarkets and bowling alleys, and even predicting the future as a paper boy. Which tell us a little about some of those early jobs when you're just a kid.
Well, when I was somewhere, around 11 or 12 years old, there was a ballpark close to where we lived, and on Sundays they used to have double headers. And my mom would help me make popcorn, and I'd bag them in little brown bags and ice the pop and take my little red wagon and spend the whole Sunday afternoon going up to the ballpark, which didn't have any concession stands, selling my pop and my popcorn. And I guess that was probably the first entrepreneurial experience at that time. Then later on, I got a job setting pins in the evenings, but I also had, in Warren, Ohio, I had a paper route of 85 Plain Dealers and 15 Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
Isn't that something?
And I would be able to take a bus from home downtown in 15 minutes. Fortunately, my paper route consisted just of 2 blocks of office buildings in Warren. So I was able to deliver my papers in these office buildings and along the way in a half hour. And I would take a bus back, and I'd be back home by 7 o'clock. Just deliver my papers in a half hour. And at one time, around 13 years of age, it was a little tough because I was getting up very early in the morning to deliver my papers, but then I was setting pins at night.
Wow.
2 leagues, a 6 o'clock league and a 9 o'clock league. And that's before automatic pin setters. And you also learned a good lesson. The concessionaire at the bowling alley let you charge anything that you wanted. So during the course of the week, I would have a hot dog or a milkshake and a bag of chips or whatever. And at the end of the week, he said, well, you owe me $26. And I got $27 or $26 for setting pins all week. So it wiped out, in effect, I ate my profits and so forth.
See, that's so typical of so many successful people. A lot of people think, well, he's so lucky and just fell into something like this. But here's a young kid and out there hustling and working early and late and all that. You first started. You're a normal boy and you're interested in sports and all, but that you couldn't continue with that because of an injury.
Well, I was in what they call now, I guess, middle school It's 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And I was in 9th grade, which was the equivalent of freshman high school, and playing football. And I got hurt. And I hurt my left knee very much so that it's what they call Osgood-Schlatters disease. It's like a cartilage between your kneecap and your knee. And I was laid up with an ankle to hip cast for quite a while. And but before that, I tried to keep the football injury away from my parents. And I went out for basketball, and I came down from a rebound and landed on the same knee. Well, there was no keeping it away from my parents. I couldn't walk. So at any rate, they determined what it was and put a big cast on my leg. And so I was through with sports. The only thing I was able to do was swim a little bit, and later on in life play golf. But the junior high school football coach says, look, you like sports so much, why don't you go down to the local paper, the Warren Tribune Chronicle, and see if you can get maybe a part-time job there. So I went down and I talked to the sports editor, Dick Olmsted, and he says, look, we can use some help on Tuesdays and Thursday nights taking basketball reports over the phone from the county league. And you make up the box scores and so forth. Well, as it turned out, they also let me have an opportunity to write some of the stories from these little box scores from the county schools. Well then, after I did this for about 3 months, the number 2 person in the 2-person sports department went off to the Korean War. And I was able to adjust my schedule as a sophomore to work 20 hours a week. And eventually, as a junior, 11th grade, I was working 30 hours a week. And by the time I was a senior, I was working 40 hours a week. Now, how do you do that? Well, I would go to the newspaper from 7 in the morning until 1:45, go to school from 1 o'clock until 4, take some summer school classes, got some credit for the work I was doing at the newspaper, and I got quite a bit of experience. And at that time, I was known as Al Machaskee, the sports writer at the Warren Tribune. And at any rate, I spent a couple more years in the sports department and then switched to the news side and was a police reporter and covered everything but society news. And it gave me a lot of newspaper experience. And I thought about going to law school, but I didn't have the means. And but at any rate, I started to go to Youngstown College at night before it was a university. And I'm taking a political science course taught by a gentleman by the name of Clingan Jackson. He was a columnist for the Youngstown Vindicator. And this is before, Youngstown University became a university, a modern campus and so forth. We were in some kind of a dungeon in this old house. And Clingan Jackson, I remember him saying, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into Ohio politics while he's kind of toothless and smoking a cigar. And well, his insight into Ohio politics was to tell you what Governor Lauschie had for breakfast. He really didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But at any rate, I spent a year at Youngstown College, and I said to myself, this is going to take forever to get my undergraduate work. I don't have the money to go to law school, and then I'll end up being one of 16 pages in Cleveland phone book. So I decided to maybe just stick with the newspapers. And in the meantime, I hooked up became a friend of mine, Tom Hyderis, and on the main strip between Warren and Youngstown, we took over an old building and called it the Fez Club, and we opened up a private club. Now, mind you, I wasn't quite 21 yet, old enough to buy it, let alone sell it. But Tommy and I ran this place for 2 years. It was an old mafia place, run by the Farr brothers. And at any rate, it had leather walls, which we had cleaned because, it was kind of a plush place inside. It looked like a Hernando's hideaway on the outside. But we fixed it up inside, put a new concrete floor in, new light fixtures. we were so undercapitalized that we had a beer cooler that you had to feed quarters into it.
Wow.
And anyway, Tommy and I ran this club for 2 years, and I might say that it was, I think, as good as any Wharton School of Business, because you see all kinds of people. You see the guys that come in, with their girlfriends on Wednesday and with their wives on Saturday, and we never did anything particularly, after hours and stuff like that. But at any rate, after 2 years, a fellow that owned the building, he was kind of a unusual character and ran crooked wrestling matches at the fairgrounds, and he had this building, and I think he burned it down because we had a big fire, and that was the end of the Fez Club. And that's what it was called, the Fez Club. So I kept thinking about, that was at the end of 1959, and by that spring, I figured I'm either going to go to Pittsburgh or I'm going to go to Cleveland, because there was, at the Warren Tribune, there was a young city editor, and there was no place for me to grow there. So I decided to explore the Melba Oliver Employment Agency in Cleveland. And they interviewed me and said, there's an opportunity in the public service department at the Plain Dealer. So I paid Melba Oliver $375 in 1960.
Wow.
Only to find out that had I been reading the Plain Dealer at that time, I would have seen that the job was offered in the classified section, and I would have saved $375. But that got me started on the business side of the paper, and I did a lot of things in those 60, 61, 62, everything from running the Cleveland Soapbox Derby to being a part of what became the Cleveland Space Science Fair. Now, this was an idea that a person by the name of Joe Guillauze and myself concocted, this idea that we would become a premier newspaper reporting on space news, but also we should have a space science fair. And we were working with local NASA at that time. Well, the idea went to Washington, and Keith Glennon at that time liked the idea so much that this 3-day show that we envisioned turned out to be a 9-day show. And we had space capsules coming from the West Coast, from Texas, and it drew 375,000 people. It was free to the public.
Wow.
And the lower chambers of Public Hall, actually we had 55,000 students come in for 5 days of classes taught by NASA engineers.
Wow.
It really was something else. And it was also kind of the coming out party for Tom Vail, who had been kind of traveling around the world. His uncle persuaded him to come to Cleveland and run the paper, because the paper was run by a lot of trust funds. And so Tom came in 19... he came to the paper in the early 60s, but the ironic thing that happened was that we built up all this steam for the Plain Dealer with the Space Science Show in 1962, and then 2 days before that Space Science Show concluded, we got hit with a strike, and the strike lasted 127 days.
Oh, wow.
And in the meantime, Tom Vail had become vice president after working his way through at the Cleveland News, but he became vice president of Forest City Publishing Company, and he was smart enough to keep his mouth shut during the strike, whereas Louis Seltzer, who was, the prince of journalism at that time at the Cleveland Press, he kind of sounded off quite a bit and alienated some of the unions, so that after the strike was over in 63, the Plain Dealer came back from the strike better than the Cleveland Press. And then, of course, since 1967, the Newhouses bought the Plain Dealer right underneath Tom Vail and everything, bought it from the trust companies. And then Tom became publisher and so on and so forth. And in the meantime, From public service, I became the promotion director of the Plain Dealer, and working very closely with the circulation director to take on the Cleveland Press, because that to me was the key for our growth. And you could see that afternoon newspapers might be waning. So in the meantime, I went back to college, but at Cleveland State. And what I thought when I was at Youngstown College, there was going to be a long time, 9, 10, 12 years, I spent 9 years at Cleveland State going to school at nights to get my degree in marketing. And quite frankly, I had to drop out 1 year from Cleveland State because we were in such an intense fight with the Cleveland Press that I just had to focus everything on my job as promotion director. Well, when I came back from that 1 year, they changed the requirements. They added some new classes, and it added another 12 hours for my graduation. So I took one of the courses out in Lakewood in the summertime and was taught by a NASA engineer. This is just one of many interesting experiences at Cleveland State. The NASA engineer, teaching a quantitative methods class during the summer, told us on the first night, I'm not going to give you a final exam because, quite frankly, I don't really want to know whether I taught you anything or not. Kind of unusual.
Yeah.
But he did break us up into pods of 5, 6 people and gave us a lot of different assignments. And we learned a lot about teamwork and how to investigate different projects and put it together in a final form. And I was the coordinator to get these things done. Well, then the night before the last night of class in this quantitative methods, which, by the way, I didn't know what it meant then, I don't know what it means now, and I don't ever want to know what the hell quantitative methods means. But we came to class the night before the last night, and there was a paper face down. And I said, oh, we've been had. We're going to get a test. Well, I turned it over, and all the instructor wanted to know is whether or not we wanted Salisbury steak or schnitzel, because we were going to the old Keepers on Detroit Road for our final night. So that was my experience going to summer school for Cleveland State. But eventually, I got my degree in marketing from Cleveland State. But even those had unusual experiences. I'm taking a marketing course. I'm battling like crazy against the Cleveland Press with my circulation director and trying to see the advantage of a morning newspaper reading habit. And in the meantime, I'm taking a marketing course where the marketing professor is teaching us the hog-corn ratio. Nice. When to sell corn, when to sell hogs. Well, I never sold any corn or never sold any hogs in Cleveland. But that was the kind of thing that, you experience going through. And then I remember one time there was a professor who was very, very, very tough. And it was some sort of a civics class or whatever. And he was rough, he was tough. But then he found out that I worked for the Plain Dealer. And somehow he thought I might be a conduit for getting his stuff published because he was a big reformist on Cleveland, on police reform. And he invited me to his house, and I got better grades and all this stuff. Well, I never did anything for him, but it got me a better grade. But that's a whole other story. But at that time, from say 63 to 64 to 72, I must say there was some very questionable instructors at the university. But it's much better, I guess, today. But I had a lot of ups and downs with Cleveland State. First of all, I went there at nights and got my degree in marketing. When I became publisher and CEO of the Plain Dealer, they invited me to give the commencement address, and then they gave me an honorary doctorate. One of four that I got in my life. One at Heidelberg, one at Akron University, and one from St. Vladimir Seminary in New York. But at any rate, Cleveland State gives me an honorary degree, and I was the commencement speaker. But then they also asked me to come on the board. Well, I was doing an awful lot of humanitarian work at that time, and it just happened to be a period where I was working with the International Orthodox Christian Charities and traveling to places like the Cameroon, Ethiopia,
Wow.
Jerusalem, Jordan, Tbilisi, Georgia, Kosovo, Bosnia, and going to all these places at my own expense just to see what we were doing on the ground in humanitarian aid. For example, building 30 water reservoirs in southern Lebanon so villagers would have water when they need it. And because I was traveling a lot, I couldn't make all the Cleveland State board meetings. And there was a law that you had to attend 60% of the meetings, and I was attending maybe 48, 50%. So I was removed from the board. Fine. And of course, the plain dealer, I remind you now, I'm running the plain dealer, and I guess just had left the PD, but they run a story on page 1, Machaskee removed from CSU board.
Wow.
If it was worth a story at all, it might have been on page 18, 3 paragraphs. And then the then publisher, Terry Egger, calls me up and says, "Oh, I'm very, very sorry. I asked my news department why they would do that. They said, well, he's so well known, we just thought, we'd put it on page 1. Oh, good luck with that. But there was always tension between, management, the publisher, and the news department. On the other hand, later on, CSU decided to vote me into their Business School Hall of Fame. So you can see, it was really a roller coaster ride. I graduate from there, I become the commencement speaker, I go on the board, I get an honorary doctorate, and then I get removed from the board, then I go into their Hall of Fame. God love them.
Yeah, so you went from Al, the sports reporter, to Dr. Machaskee, actually.
Yeah, which I never used that term, by the way, but some people do.
So you were traveling very early, and were you interested? You're so involved in international affairs, Cleveland Group, CCWA, Cultural Garden, so many others. Did that whet your appetite for international, or did you have that before, or was it your travel that inspired that?
I was influenced somewhat. A book by an author and a French attorney by the name of Samuel Pizarre, and he wrote a book about coexistence and commerce. And basically the theme of the book is that the more international trade you have between countries, the less chance there is that they'll blow up one another. And that kind of sharpened my interest in international affairs. And I enjoyed traveling. When I was a teenager, my folks couldn't afford to fly anywhere in the wintertime or fly anywhere, any time of the year. But we would take trips on my mother's tips. And we went to Mexico twice. Wow. That's a long haul. You got, from Cleveland to go down through Texas and cross over in Nogales and go down through Guadalajara and so forth all the way into Mexico City. But those were great experiences, and I enjoyed traveling with my mom and dad. I was maybe 16, 17 years old at the time, but I'd go off on my own. If I saw something of interest, I'd tell my parents about it, and they would go to it the next night. And those were some early experiences just with international travel to Canada and to Mexico. And then later on, I did much more traveling, both in different organizations that I belonged to, and then later on, a combination of traveling with the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra as a vice president of the orchestra, and then traveling just for my own pleasure with my wife.
Now, obviously, we have to segue into the Serbian component, such an important part of your life, Serbian culture and faith and heritage and all that. So when did you really get involved? You, as a kid, obviously, you spent your Saturdays learning and all that, but with your travels going to Serbia, and you have so many titles and awards from Serbia and Serbian organizations, when did that really blossom?
The good part of the Serbian part of me came about because I formed a Serbian acoustic Tamburitza orchestra, and we had a group of two Serbian brothers and one Italian, and we formed this group in the 60s, and we were together for over 40 years. And we traveled everywhere from, like I said, New York to California, Las Vegas, and by playing an awful lot, I didn't like to sing songs that I didn't know what they meant, so that expanded my knowledge of the Serbian language and so forth. But also, I guess my very first trip to Serbia was in 1973, and I spent time in Serbia, which at that time was Yugoslavia, and also then went to London and went to Paris, and enjoyed it. I mean, I saw some wonderful things in that travel. And then there was a period there from 73 where I really didn't travel much until somewhere in about the mid-80s, around 85, 86. And then it was a combination of personal travel and some humanitarian travel with the International Orthodox Christian Charities, and also traveling with the Cleveland Orchestra. For example, at one time the Cleveland Orchestra was thinking about going to Korea, and I wasn't interested in going to Korea, and they ultimately didn't go to Korea. But in lieu of going to Korea, my wife and I, we went to Singapore and to Bangkok. And then the orchestra decided to go to Japan, and that's where we hooked up with the orchestra in Japan. So it was a great time in Japan because you had the Cleveland Orchestra playing at the Suntory Auditorium, but the Cleveland Museum of Art also had a big exhibition going on showing Asian works of art, some 160 of them, that were never shown in Cleveland because they never had the room in their Asian section to expand with everything they had. So you had the Cleveland Museum of Art and the Cleveland Orchestra both in Tokyo at the same time.
Wow.
So we went from Singapore to Bangkok, which was quite an experience, and then we went to Tokyo with the Cleveland Orchestra, then to Hong Kong, from Hong Kong to Shanghai, and from Shanghai to Beijing.
Oh, jeez.
Now, the interesting part of a lot of this was that in each of the cities that we went to, Singapore and Bangkok were slightly different because I would look up the Associated Press bureau chief and get together with him for dinner. And then over a 2-hour dinner, you get an overview of the country. When we got to Tokyo, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Beijing, I got the bureau chief, Associated Press bureau chief, to go to dinner, but also took him to the concert. Well, there was two purposes there. One, I got an overview of the country, but they got exposed to the Cleveland Orchestra. So it was a win-win situation. But I was totally blown away by Shanghai because at that time, their attitude was, we will build it and they will come. I wrote a column about that, that at the time I was in Shanghai, 7 of the 10 largest world construction cranes were in Shanghai, building skyscrapers, everything. And across the river from the main part of Shanghai, they built the area of Pudong. In fact, the night that they had a dinner for the Cleveland Orchestra, it was in a hotel that still wasn't occupied by anyone. So here I am, sitting with the mayor of Shanghai. He doesn't speak a word of English. I don't speak a word of Chinese, but we had an interpreter, and we had a great time. But this was just indicative of their view that it would come, people would come, and they did. They filled it up with hotels, boutique hotels, retail, everything. It's a very thriving area today. And I saw things there that it took a while for the Cleveland Museum of Art to adapt. But for example, back in those days, 40 years ago, I mean, you could go to an exhibit at the Shanghai Museum and press a button and get everything you needed to know about that exhibit. And you could go from floor to floor doing the same thing. It took a while before you got anything close to that at the Cleveland Museum of Art. But at any rate, those were good travel experiences with the orchestra. We went with the orchestra several times to Europe, to the Salzburg Festival. There was one trip that I made with the late Jenny Brown and her husband. We went to Rome. From Rome, we went to Paris. We happened to be in Paris during the observation of the Normandy invasion, so we went up to Normandy and spent time at Rome and the cathedral there, and a great lunch there, and listened to the orchestra in Paris. And then we went to Vienna and listened to the orchestra in Vienna. Then the orchestra went to Germany, and I wasn't interested in going to Germany. So my wife and I and another couple, we got a car, and we drove from Vienna through Slovenia and stopped and saw some friends there. And then from there to Vienna, from Vienna down to through Tuscany. But what's the other great museum's name in the Tuscany area? After you leave Venice, coming down south, I know they had a huge flood there, and they moved everything from the first level to the second level. It'll come back to me. I remember our tour guide's name was Francesca. She took us all these different museums. It's a famous city, and I can't think of it. But from there, down through Tuscany and back to Rome. So we made a complete, circle. I mean, just think about that. I mean, covering Rome and Paris and Vienna, and then to Venice, and then I can't think for the life of me this city, and I know it like the back of my hand. But anyway, it'll come to me. But those are the kinds of trips that we really enjoy. One that was strictly just personal for my wife and I was to go to South America. And we went to Santiago, Chile, and from there to Buenos Aires. And from Buenos Aires we went to Rio de Janeiro and covered an awful lot of ground. Another spectacular trip, because we had someone from the Russian Orthodox Church serve as a tour guide, but we flew from Cleveland to New York to St. Petersburg. And from St. Petersburg, after we saw everything we could see there, we went to Moscow. Now, when I was all through with this, almost virtually every trip I ever took, I wrote a narrative about it. My narrative on our trip to St. Petersburg and Moscow runs 72 pages.
Oh, wow.
Because we saw things that no tour guide even saw. I mean, we just looked at things and saw things. But unusual things that would come together. Go to a cemetery, and you see, like, Tchaikovsky's cemetery. But then, that same night, we sat in the royal box and saw Sleeping Beauty, right? Tchaikovsky's Sleeping Beauty. I mean, just to be able to see his grave, and then to see his creation on stage,
That depth of experience is what's made you one of the reasons you're so valuable to organizations like, the Cleveland Council World Fair, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Cleveland Orchestra, things like that. I have to jump back a second with the music because, 40 years with the Tamburitza Orchestra, but I hear there was one, probably your biggest gig was down at the Ohio State Fair, and you were an opening act for someone.
Oh, yeah. Well, we knew people in the Governor Rhodes' cabinet, and they knew about our music. So they would get us hired to play 6 dates out of the 12 or 14 dates of the Ohio State Fair. It was usually over 2 weekends, 3 days and then another 3 days over 2 weekends. So this one time, they said, how would you like to do the opening act for Bob Hope? Oh, wow. So we do, on a Saturday night, in front of 25,000 people at the Ohio State Fairgrounds, we do 45 minutes, and we do a continental tour. Our name was the Continental Strings of Cleveland. And so we played music from Greece, Spain, Italy, Russia, Serbia, Spanish. I mean, we cover, we do a quick kind of a sampler in 40-45 minutes as an opening act. So then we finish and we go backstage, and Bob Hope does his thing, and then he takes a break. And while he's taking a break, his wife, Dorothy, she goes out and sings a few songs. Well, Governor Rhodes is there. He says to Bob Hope, hey, Bob, come on over here. I want you to take a picture with the boys. Now, there's the 4 of us in our native kind of vests and balloon sleeve shirts. And here's a picture with Governor Rhodes, Bob Hope, and the 4 of us. I must have made 1,000 copies of that flyer. A lot of fun.
That's amazing. When we talk about, you've had so many well-deserved awards, for your social work, and we can go on now, but we'll list some of those in your bio, the United Way and various religious and philanthropic things. But you got the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, so many awards. Of course, you were in the inaugural class at Cleveland International Hall of Fame. When we think about, when I think about personally your time at the Plain Dealer, one of the way ahead of your time things that you came up with something called Mosaic, and you had your foot soldier out there, Bill Miller. Tell us about Mosaic.
Well, what I found was that the news department or the editor, just like the circulation director or the production director or the advertising director, reported to the publisher and so forth. And what I found is that, you leave the news department have a certain amount of their own independence. Well, they never had time or resources to really pay attention to the 100+ ethnic organizations in Cleveland, neither their religion nor their culture and so forth. So I got the idea that I would hire some people outside of the news department, and we put together the concept of a 8-page section. These are 8 full pages once a month on the 3rd week of the month that would carry features on different ethnic groups, whether it was their culture or religion or what. And it was known as the Mosaic because it was a mosaic of the 100+ ethnic groups that we have in Cleveland. And that went on for about 3 years. And then, of course, I retired in 2006 from the Plain Dealer, and 3 months after I retired, a new regime cut it out. Yeah. And it was unfortunate because it really had a following, and it brought an awful lot of information that was new to the non-ethnic groups in Cleveland. And let's face it, I mean, part of it is still true today, but other than politicians who periodically, at their convenience and their need, try to attract ethnics, the civic leadership has never paid a lot of attention to the ethnics in the town. Never have. Doing an awful lot of the work on editing Mosaic was Richard Osborne, a very, very talented man who still is active and still doing a lot of writing. And but he was the anchor for Mosaic, both in the monthly presentations of 8 pages and also in the Mosaic book. And I can never say enough about everything that he contributed to it.
And now this segues into what a project you're working on now, and that Rich is involved in too. But it's kind of like your Mosaic, the next level. Tell us what you're doing at the historical.
Yes, in a second. But I want to correct something because I had a senior moment earlier when we were talking about traveling and the Cleveland Orchestra, where we went from Rome to Paris to Vienna, and from Vienna to Ljubljana, and Ljubljana to Venice, and the city that I couldn't remember, shame on me, but was Florence.
Oh, okay.
And what a treasure of art there, and really a great, great time, and then back to Rome. So it was a wonderful experience, but basically traveling with the Cleveland Orchestra. I'll just digress for a minute.
Yeah.
In one of those travels with the orchestra before the very talented Franz Walsermost, I remember being in London at the London Proms, and after the concert we went to a Thai restaurant, and on the second level of this Thai restaurant, Christoph von Dakiani, the late Christoph von Dakiani, changed into a black turtleneck, casual, had a couple of Thai beers, and he says, Alex, this traveling with the orchestra would be great if you didn't have to play music. He was a great, great conductor, and we had a lot of fun with him, particularly in Tokyo, but that's another story for another day. All right, segue from, when we were doing Mosaic, I always thought that we should have some place where there could be a kind of universal recognition of the ethnic community in Cleveland. And finally, after about a year of exploring this, it's happening. And it's happening at the Western Reserve Historical Center, which is a great location for something called the International Heritage Gallery. Now, this International Heritage Gallery will be a permanent gallery at the Western Reserve Historical Center. And it will be the story of immigrants' contribution to Northeast Ohio. And as we go along, there will be a mosaic, to use that word again, there will be a mosaic of all of the 118 or plus ethnic groups in Cleveland, about their culture and about their heritage and so forth. So I'm very pleased that Kelly Falcone and the board of the Historical Center have recognized a win-win situation, because for the Historical Center, they will be able to reach out with their tentacles and draw interest from the ethnic communities. And for the ethnic communities, it gives them a great place in University Circle that has parking and has an awful lot of other attractions going on, but it'll be a place where the ethnic story can be told. And I'm so pleased that we're in a stage now of early fundraising. We are in the early stage of conceptual design, and the objective is to be able to finish this project by the end of summer of 2026 or early fall, in conjunction with the 250th anniversary of the United States.
Great. When I think of you may disagree, but I think of two other Clevelanders, and you're like peas in a pod, and you may have other people or whatever, but the first is someone who's half Serbian, half Slovenian, and I think one of the quotes I remember from Mayor, Senator, Governor George Voinovich was, "People who care and practice their ethnic heritage make great Americans." So you were obviously very tight with George Voinovich. Can you tell us a little about that relationship?
Well, we were close. But when he was running for governor, and he came out to the Oktoberfest in Painesville, and Steve Bensick, the late Steve Bensick, made sure he went all out for this gubernatorial candidate. So he had barbecued lamb and slivovitz, and there was George and Janet Voinovich and his entourage, and my musicians and I, we were there for the Oktoberfest. We were playing every year. But when Voinovich was there, we came to where he was having his dinner, and we were playing music, and he was reminiscing about the old songs that his father knew. His father was a Serbian architect who was the architect of the Serbian cathedral, St. Sava Cathedral, out on Broadview. Well, George Voinovich had such a good time that evening. He said, "You know, I really enjoy doing this." I says, "Well, if you enjoy it so much, when you become governor, why don't you have us come down to the governor's mansion? I'll bring the music and the Slivovitz, and you provide the food and invite the ethnics that you want to invite." The day after he was sworn in as governor, he called me up and he says, "Were you serious about coming down with the guys and playing music and bringing Slivovitz?" I said, "Of course I was." So we picked a date in June, and we went down. And it was really a fabulous, fabulous time. He had great food right there on the lawn of the governor's mansion, and we played music. And when the whole crowd dispersed, and the governor had a couple of beers, he says, "I want to do a few of those Serbian songs that I remember from my father." And we did. We had super, super time. But he once told me that he likes Slivovitz. It's a Serbian plum brandy. Some people that aren't used to it if you drink it, make you take back things you never stole. But anyway, Senator Voinovich, as I refer to him, who's also memorialized at our Serbian Cultural Garden, told me one time he liked Slivovitz so much that when he was senator, if he didn't have to go out among the public, he would have a shot of Slivovitz every morning, just to kickstart the day for him.
Oh, that's something. You know, the other person I associate you with, and as a peer and a brother in arms, is the late Sam Miller.
Sam Miller, he was like a brother to me. I mean, he did so many things unknown to so many people, and for so many people. His energy and his brain power and what he contributed to people, and not just financial support, which was always a big thing, but in ideas and in encouragement. Sam was just one of those very, very special people. And when I was publisher, he asked for nothing. In fact, we got to know each other when I was assistant to the publisher. And then he followed me from being an assistant to the publisher from 1972 to 1980. And then when I was director of labor relations and took on some tough assignments from 80 to 85, Sam was always available for exchanging ideas. And then when I became vice president and general manager, at the beginning of 1986 until I became publisher and CEO in 90. But Sam would call me up every couple of days and say, "Is there anything I can do for you? Anybody giving you any problems?" And we always had great, great dialogue. And he's the one that, for me at least, coined the phrase, no good deed goes unpunished, because you do something good and something happens and there's a consequence. But the other person that was very important to me and in the ethnic community was Bill Miller. Bill Miller was the person who covered our ethnic communities. And he not only covered them, but he enjoyed life with them. He enjoyed drinking with them, eating with them. He was just like you are today. You're out, 7 days a week, and you go to 3-4 functions every day. And Bill Miller would write about him, but he would go to some of these functions when he wasn't writing about him. And in the process, he introduced me to an awful lot of leaders in the ethnic community. It was really through Bill Miller that I first met Margaret Wong, whom I've known now for over 35 years. And we're very, very close. The whole Wong family and my family, we shared the goods and the not so goods. I mean, when Margaret's father was on his last days, my mother was on her last days, and the Wong family and my family spent a whole week together at the Cleveland Clinic, waiting for one parent and the other parent to pass away peacefully. So we're very close. We were always very close, and we're still very close.
Yeah, I remember the first time I met Bill Miller, he read my name tag or something, said Dan Hansen, and he put his arm around me and just started singing Danny Boy. I mean, that's how he was.
Yeah.
He was just like that.
Yeah.
You know, we have to talk about, on MLK Boulevard, there's a tree, and there's at the bottom of the tree, there's a plaque, and it's dedicated to Alex Machaskee, and it's, before, in the Cleveland Cultural Gardens with 40 or so ethnic heritage gardens, there was a Yugoslav garden. And of course, Yugoslavia split up in 1990, and then you came along and founded the Serbian garden. Tell us about that whole.
Well, you're right. I mean, the Slovenians started the garden in the early 1930s. And before the decade was out, the Croatians and Serbians were invited in, and so became the Yugoslav gardens for many, many years. And it stayed that way until Yugoslavia broke up at the end of the 90s, and then the Croatians and Serbians were out. And I still had, some influence and could do things towards the end of my, before I retired at the Plain Dealer. And I said, we're going to have a Serbian garden. So I petitioned the city to get a nice plot of land, and we started. We started with a fundraiser that raised $105,000 to get our basic plans by Jim McKnight of a serpentine walkway that goes through the gardens with a plaza in the middle. And over the years, our main fundraiser has been a Serbian golf outing the second Saturday every July at Sleepy Hollow. And so over the last 16, 17 years, about every year and a half or so, every 2 years, we've added a new bust and a new bust. So today, we actually have 12 busts in the garden, everything from Tesla, of course, to Michael Pupin, another great scientist, to King Peter I, to Vuk Karadžić, the founder of the Serbian alphabet, and on it goes. But also, like Mileva Madić, the wife of Albert Einstein, whom he, in later years, lamented the fact that he didn't include her name on his application for a Nobel Peace Prize, but she was a mathematical genius and helped him immensely. But we also have, usually these busts are for people who have passed on, but we had an opportunity to get a bust donated to us of Novak Djokovic. So Novak Djokovic is also in that garden. And then more recently, a year ago, this last August, we added 4 faces. And next to our patron saint, Serbian patron saint, Sava, we also added Saint Nikolai Velimirovic and Saint Justin Popovic. And then also Judge Parker, whose real name is Georgi Šagac, and he's the first Serbian immigrant to come to the United States. And then there's another person that we added, Jovan Cvijic, who was very, very well known as the head of the Academy of Sciences in Serbia. So we added 4 faces to the plaza, which had Saint Sava, and then we have 12 busts. Altogether, we have 17 figures in the garden right now. And I must say that we have more women in our garden, I think, than any other garden.
Yeah.
And we've got 17 representations of people who rose to prominence who have a Serbian background.
It is. It's an amazing garden, and it does have the most women represented. I think one of the things that always stand out for me in the plaza is the saying in both English and Cyrillic, "Only unity will save the Serbs." Yes,
it's in Serbian. It's "Samo sloga Srbina spasava Only unity will save the Serbian people. Now, as a Serbian, an observer of Serbian politics and Serbian activities, I must say it's a lot easier to say and to sing it than it is to make it happen. But from time to time, the community does come together.
You know, we can't talk about Serbian Cultural Garden without talking about Lex Machaskee.
Well, I'll tell you, here's a person that shuns any kind of attention, limelight, or for that matter, congratulatory recognition. But it's just his nature to be helpful and to help people. And when it comes to the garden, you will find Lex at the garden some part of a weekend, most of the weekends of the year. Maybe with the exception of 4 or 5 weekends, he's there every weekend, maintaining the garden, doing something constructive to keep up the beauty of the garden. But that's his nature. I mean, Lex, every time there's a function at the church, and the women do all the cooking in the kitchens and all that, Lex volunteers and stays there for many hours, just washing dishes and pots and pans. I mean, how many people would do that? Not only that, but I have a stepson who tragically had a stroke 14 years ago, and he can do nothing for himself. He has to have pureed food, he can't stand on his own 2 feet, and he doesn't have the use of one arm. So my wife goes to see him every morning, and I go every afternoon. But there are many times if I'm out of town that Lex goes to see him. I mean, and he goes to see him at least once a week. And that's quite how can I put it, a reflection of his heart. That's just him.
Yeah, he's amazing. You know, so we start off in Warren, Ohio, and you're selling bags of popcorn, and you're delivering the plain dealer, and you evolve and grow and work hard and become, you know, the honorary consul of the Republic of Serbia and a doctor from several places and a publisher of Ohio's largest newspaper and all. When you look back, what do you think? I mean, just your general impression. Is this something, you know, that only Alex Machaskee could have done, or is this something that just working hard and
Well, my paternal grandmother, who never went to one grade of school, one time told me in her broken English, "No work, no pork." You don't work, you don't eat. And I think between my parents and my grandparents, I developed a work ethic. And I wasn't the smartest kid in class, but I tried to work hard. And that served me well over the years. Secondly, my maternal grandmother, who again never went to a grade of school, ended up with a 148-acre farm and lost her husband at an early life, and the second male in the household. 6 weeks later, she lost the 2 men and was left with 8 very young children, my mother being the oldest at 18 years of age, and the rest of the youngest one being a year and a half old. So here she was, a farm with no electricity, no indoor plumbing, and my dad, who worked in the steel mill, he would go there on his days off and eventually brought in electricity into the house and plumbing into the house and so forth. But that grandmother, one time, and a lot of times actually, if you said something negative about anybody, she would always say, "Baš nije tako zločist" in Serbian, which means that person is really not that bad. She could always find something good to say about somebody, even if you had negative things to say about the person, she could always find something good to say about a person. And I admired those two grandmothers so much because of just their philosophies. They weren't fanatic religious people. I mean, just good hearts. And as they say, a pure heart, a person with a pure heart has a good chance of seeing God. And I think those two did.
Well, that's kind of sums up the Alex Machaskee story. You know, the good thing is you started very early, but you're still going, and you've got this really exciting project coming up at the West Reserve Historical Society and all your other projects. So it's good to hear some of these stories. I know there are a lot more, but we'll wrap this up now. And I thank you for these great insights and philosophy and stories. It's a pleasure.
Well, thank you.